You were part of a violent mob, and you were playing your part to the full.
Today you must face up to the consequences of those actions. Everyone must understand that if you engage in this sort of mob violence, you will receive significant punishment.
An immediate custodial sentence cannot be avoided.
You have brought shame on yourself and the town of which you are a resident. You must be punished for what you did.
So those are a few of the judges sentencing those who've been involved in rioting across the UK, those judgments being handed down in the past few days. More of those cases in courts today, the wave of arrests, trials and potential prison sentences threatening to overwhelm the system. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. Now, Stephen, we discussed the pressures on the prison system just a few weeks ago on the podcast, and that was before all of the unrest we've been talking about. The word crisis is much overused by politicians and the media, and I dislike the way it's used everywhere. But I think when it comes to the prisons, the country's prison service, it's probably a fair description. The background to all of this is that we lock up more people in the UK relative to our population than any other country in Western Europe. The incarceration rate in England and Wales is roughly twice that of Germany. And of course, in recent years, sentences have been getting longer and longer.
Now, since we last covered this, the prison and judicial system has had to grapple with the challenge of this sudden influx of new cases related to the riots, which takes us to this morning when emergency measures called Operation Early Dawn were put in place to try to handle the crisis. And joining us now to help us understand what's going on in the system is Tom Franklin, Chief Executive of the Magistrates Association. They're the membership body for lay magistrates in England and Wales, the unpaid volunteers who handle the first steps of most criminal cases. Tom, great to have you with us. Can you explain to us what Operation Early Dawn is and means for your members now that these emergency measures have been put in place?
Well, it means that there will be a delay in some people who are charged of an offence coming to court, because the prison service cannot guarantee that if they were remanded in custody, there would be a prison place for them. Now, we understand this isn't affecting all regions, so it's some regions, particularly in the north, and that it will be reviewed throughout the day. And we're also assured it's a temporary measure. We know that pressures on prison places will ease somewhat on the 10th of September. And that's because on that date, what's called SDS 40 comes into play. And you'll be aware that the government a few weeks ago announced that people in prison who have served 40% of their custodial sentence will be eligible for consideration for parole. And on the 10th of September, that kicks in, and that will release thousands of places. That's only a temporary solution because the pressures on the prison population will continue, and that only gives us a little bit of respite.
Tom, clearly this is an emergency measure, but what will the knock-on effects be of this to the criminal justice system and for your members in particular?
Well, what it means is that if this happens over several days, there's a likelihood that our members will be sitting around in court waiting for cases, and there won't be cases to be dealt with. And that's a huge waste of resources when our members are sitting there ready to dispense justice. It's just the latest in the long line of this sort of sticking plaster short-term solutions to problems that keep on occurring in the justice system. I mean, basically, it's no surprise that this has been announced today. The justice system is lurching from crisis to crisis, and it's been doing so for a number of years. And those are often unseen by the public, but our members are very, very aware of this situation. And this is just the latest in a long line.
Yeah, indeed. This similar operation had to be put into place in May of this year under the previous government as well because of similar issues. I mean, does that give us an idea of A, how effective this is in relieving the immediate pressures, and B, how long it takes to catch up after you've essentially, as you outlined, suspended some of the processes that were due to go through courts in these days?
Well, the fact is that there are backlogs, particularly in Crown courts, of cases that sometimes go on for 2 years and sometimes even longer than that. And actually, a large proportion of people in prison are people that haven't actually been convicted of an offence. They are awaiting trial. And there are thousands of people in prison in that situation. And when you've got these very large backlogs in Crown courts, it means that the whole system is clogged up. And that has all of these knock-on effects. So that's why taking these sort of short-term measures, and we understand why the government's done this today, the need for it, but they are no solution. What's needed is that holistic approach. It needs all of the different parts of the criminal justice system need to be dealt with as a whole to come to long-term solutions, because we just can't keep on going on like this.
Tell us more about the state of the magistrate service at the moment, because there have been big changes, haven't there, over the last few years? Lots of magistrates' courts have been cut, and there are far fewer magistrates than before.
There are. I mean, there's now about 14,000 magistrates. That's down from more than twice that number, about 15 or so years ago. And a large number, as you say, of local courts have been closed. That is a concern to us. It's obviously important that the service is efficient, and it has got more efficient over the years. But that needs to be balanced with making sure it is also effective. And we are concerned about the importance of maintaining local justice. And that is really difficult when courts are becoming more and more remote from local communities. It puts pressure on our members because they are finding they're having to travel further and further to those courts. And it's also very difficult for witnesses, victims and defendants who have to attend court, very often in places where there isn't good public transport and so on. So there are real pressures with that. But it's the whole system is the issue. Right the way across, there are these pressures. And another one would be to do with the vans and the drivers delivering defendants to courts. Very often that's not done in a way which means that the defendants arrive on time, and that leads to further delays and further problems within court. So our members on a daily basis deal with the frustration of all of these delays and inefficiencies that are taking place. More investment is needed, but actually there's an enormous amount of waste because of the lack of investment over the last few years.
Tom, I'm really struck by that number that you're talking about half the number of magistrates now than there were 15 years ago. I'm thinking back to, and the comparisons have been drawn regularly to the London riots in 2011. Night courts were run, to try and process some of the people who were charged in relation to that unrest. How different is the situation in magistrates' courts now compared to then, and the resources that are available?
Well, I don't think it's had any impact as far as the recent civil disorder. Those cases have been dealt with effectively and efficiently. And actually, the backlog in magistrates' courts, although there is a backlog, it's not. It's actually gone down over the last few years, although it's sort of stabilised more recently. The issue with backlogs is particularly in the Crown courts. One of the things that we have asked for is for magistrates to be given greater powers so that they can deal with the least serious cases that up to now are going to the Crown courts. Actually, the last government agreed to that, and they extended the cases that magistrates could look at for those with a maximum sentence of 6 months to 12 months, and that helped. The problem with that was that it meant that cases were being dealt with faster. And so after only a few months of that being introduced, it was suddenly withdrawn because the system couldn't cope with the extra number of people that were being sentenced as a result. That shows how temporary short-term solutions aren't the answer, and that actually all parts of the system need to come together to produce long-term solutions. And it's something that's going to take years for us to get out of this. We're under no illusion about that. But unless that happens, we're just going to be limping on in a situation where the system is in crisis and could fall over at any time.
Many parts of the public sector say they're short of cash, but I think it's probably fair to say that the legal justice system has faced some of the most stringent kind of funding settlements over the last few years. But beyond money, which clearly you'd like to see spent, how else should we reform the system? How can we make the justice system work better from your point of view?
So again, I think what's needed is a sort of whole systems approach to this. All parts of the system are connected. So there's often calls from politicians for more police. Well, that's their prerogative. But there needs to be a realisation that more police is likely to lead to more arrests, which is likely to lead to more court cases, which means there needs to be more lawyers to represent those defendants, more magistrates, more court staff, more probation officers, and even more vans and drivers to take people to and from court. And at the moment, there isn't that whole systems thinking approach, and that's what's needed. It is more investment, but it's also the way that is done as well. And I think the other thing that's needed is a public debate about the purpose of prison and of other types of sentences as well.
I wonder, from what you've heard from this government, being led obviously by a former DPP, how kind of confident are you in the messages you're getting from them? Do they understand the problem? Are you confident they will put solutions in place?
It's very, very early days. We haven't yet had a chance to meet with the Lord Chancellor, although we're hoping that will happen soon. We know that we are speaking in concert with a lot of other organisations like ourselves within the justice system as well. And I just hope that the government, it's coming it's got a fresh start. I just hope it doesn't get caught up in this sort of it feels sometimes like a giant game of whack-a-mole where governments are so focused on hitting the next problem that comes up, only for a new one to shoot up, that they lose sight and they don't have the headspace to be thinking longer term as well. And that's why, if we had 5 minutes with the new Lord Chancellor, what we would say is, please get all of the parties together to sit down to work out a long-term solution to this perpetual state of crisis, rather than just focus on the next problem. And if I think the government did that, it would carry the goodwill across, because people know that it's going to take time to get us out of this hole.
Okay, Tom Franklin, Chief Executive of the Magistrates Association, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Woolcock and our audio engineer was Peter Nicolino. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.